I'm KRISTIN Lord. I'm the president and CEO of IREX. Delighted to welcome you all. For those of you who don't know IREX, but I'm guessing if you know Uzbekistan, you know IREX pretty well. But just to remind you of what IREX is today, we're a 50-year-old international and education and development NGO. We promote more just, prosperous, and inclusive societies around the world by cultivating leaders, engaging and empowering youth, extending access to quality education and information, and strengthening civic, governing, and educational institutions. I want to say how happy we are to be here with my friend JOAN MOWER and to host this event with the U.S. Agency for Global Media. I still always have to look down to read that, sorry, I'll get used to it eventually. Which led the design and planning of this event with IREX. So thank you so much to you, JOAN, and all your colleagues at USAGM. I also want to thank the Central Asia-CAUCASUS Institute and you, Dr. Starr, thank you so much for your support in bringing many of the folks here. It's really wonderful to have you here, such an esteemed expert. Lisa Curtis, thank you so much for being here, representing the National Security Council of the United States in the White House. We really look forward to hearing from you about the White House's perspective on the reforms happening in Uzbekistan, and especially since the historic meeting between President Trump and President Mirziyoyev, and that was approximately 1 year ago, right here in Washington. So this event is very, very well timed. There is, of course, no more esteemed and honored representative of Washington to share the Uzbek perspective than the Uzbek ambassador to the United States, His Excellency Javlon Vakhabov. Thank you very much for being here. Let me just quickly say that IREX has a very proud history of supporting the people of Uzbekistan. Before 2006, when IREX and many other international NGOs departed, we actually administered 10 different programs in Uzbekistan in partnership with the U.S. Department of State and USAID, including some run by Gavin Halfie, who's here today. Thank you for coming back. IREX worked closely with Uzbek ministries, local governments, universities, schools, and other partners on projects that promoted a lot of the same things that IREX works on today. Quality education, access to technology, leadership development, gender equity and inclusion, empowered youth, civil society, and media, of course media. So for example, we worked with over 100 schools throughout the country to enrich classroom experiences for teachers and students. We offered exchange opportunities so that we were able to bring many Uzbek teachers and students to spend a year here in American schools, and of course we were able to learn from them as well. In 2004, we started the Tech Age Girls Project in Uzbekistan, and that's really a phenomenal program that not only gives young girls technology skills, but also leadership skills and engages them in their communities as well. And Uzbekistan was really at the foreground of that project because we've now run that program in 10 countries, and we've actually just launched it in India and Nepal. So we're very grateful that we had the opportunity to do that. I want to thank all of you for being here once again. Look forward to the remarks of the panel, and now I'm going to turn it over to JOAN MOWER. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm JOAN MOWER. I'm the head of training and development at the U.S. Agency for Global Media. We're your taxpayers' dollar at work. We're the U.S. agency that does all the broadcasting. My job actually is to work to support independent journalists and to improve the professionalization of journalism. And we're trying to work with IREX and other partners. We've been encouraged to do more partnerships with other organizations, so this is a wonderful example of an IREX USAGM partnership. Our two major projects going into Uzbekistan are Voice of America, and we have Navbahor here, who was the first accredited correspondent for VOA in Uzbekistan. She's actually a household name in Uzbekistan. And we also have Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's website, which is an Uzbek language website, and unfortunately is still blocked in Uzbekistan. So that part of reform has not gone too well. Maybe the ambassador could shed some light on that. Maybe we'll have some good news out of this panel. I'm going to stop there. I think the panel is much more interesting than I am, and thank you very much for being our moderator, and we look forward to it. Thanks very much.
Excellent, thank you both. So I have, my name's Alicia Phillips Mandaville, and I'm the Vice President for Programs here at IREX, and I have the distinguished honor of being able to moderate and facilitate a panel of fabulous visitors, guests, and expertise. I want to make sure to introduce them so that you have bios in front of you, you can follow along, you can read additional facts, but just so that everyone has a good sense of who we are going to have a chance to hear from. First of all, immediately to my left, Ambassador Vakhabov. So Ambassador Vakhabov is the ambassador of Uzbekistan to the United States, and was appointed in October 2017, but after serving as the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Prior to joining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he was the director of the Institute for Strategic and Interregional Research, which is a government-funded think tank in Tashkent. And knew early that this was the path for him in terms of both of his degrees are from the University of World Economy and Diplomacy in Tashkent. Focused on exactly the things that you would expect for this esteemed career destination. Beside him is Lisa Curtis, who is the Deputy Assistant to the President and National Security Council Senior Director for South and Central Asia, which means she advises the President and the National Security Advisor and guides U.S. interagency policy process on the region in a variety of ways. We actually crossed paths a few years ago in inverse circumstance where I was in government and she was at a think tank, and so it's nice to see you here in this picture. To her left is Navbahor Imamova, who is, as we heard, a prominent Uzbek journalist at the Voice of America, and is the first accredited journalist based there from the U.S. She's been reporting for nearly 20 years on TV, radio, and online, and of interest is the founding president of the VOA Women's Caucus, which maybe we'll talk more about too. And finally, at the end of the line, Dr. Frederick Starr is the founding chairman of the Central Asia-CAUCASUS Institute and Silk Road Studies Program, which is a research and policy center affiliated with the American Foreign Policy Institute in Washington and the Institute for Security and Development Policy in Stockholm. He is a frequent commentator on the affairs of the region and recently was the co-editor of Uzbekistan's News Base, which was the first study of post-Karimov Uzbekistan, which is obviously relevant for our conversation today. A fact that you may not know and probably won't come up today, but he has also authored a number of books on New Orleans, which is 60 miles from my hometown, so I'm sure.
Why do you spell your name wrong?
Yeah, you gotta ask my husband. There's a city right next to New Orleans named Mandaville with an E where the A in my name is. Everyone spells my name that way when they're in any case, enough about my name and New Orleans. The way we were hoping to host this today is to give each of our esteemed guests 5 minutes to make some opening remarks. I will then ask a series of questions to kind of get the conversation going, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for question and answer. I'm an assertive moderator, and then I will let you know when we hit the 4 minutes of 5 minutes so that you can know timing-wise where we are. That way we can have plenty of time for discussion. All right, over to you, Mr. Ambassador. And I can hand you this, but I'm afraid we'll get feedback if you use this microphone here. We're at that shape, and I'll send mine.
So thank you so much for your kind introduction. It's a great honor and absolute delight to take part in today's event. And also I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to all of you who are participating in today's, I would say, workshop or birthday panel. So indeed, it was mentioned in the title of today's panel, so we'll be taking stock of the monumental efforts by Uzbekistan and the United States to sustain and enhance new era of strategic partnership between our countries. As it was noted, that was launched last year on May 15th, 17th, when the President of Uzbekistan paid his first ever official walking visit to Uzbekistan, to the United States, And by the way, he was personally invited by President Trump. And now it is right time to look through how the year of 2018 went and what are the main tasks that we are undergoing right now. So before I switch to my opening remarks, I would like to share with you latest news coming from Tashkent. Today, early in the morning, a special plane with 156 Uzbek passengers landed at the Tashkent International Airport. People who were brought to Uzbekistan from the Middle East. Mostly women and children. Now, so at this moment, all those people are provided with required medical assistance and psychological aid. And our key goal is to bring all of them back to a normal life in Uzbekistan. Again, it signifies that how Uzbekistan, how the leadership of our country is paying key attention to its citizens, regardless wherever they are and whatever they do. So, in these terms, I would like to draw your attention that this step taken by the government of Uzbekistan reflects that well-known motto that was announced by the president right after he took his office in 2016. The motto that says people's interest and human values are paramount priority, and we are still following this motto. So, and from the outset of my remarks, I would like to draw your attention also to the title of today's panel, specifically the part where it says pledged reforms. So I want to stress that it is not about the pledge per se, rather that it's about commitment on the highest level to reforms that is irreversible in nature. So, currently all ongoing reforms are organized around a solid commitment to ensuring the rule of law, providing good governance, strengthening our social policy, mainly focusing on healthcare and education, liberalizing our national economy, and of course conducting good neighborhood policy in the region, and of course promoting our relationship with great powers, of course without sacrificing our independence and sovereignty. So these are the main pillars of the strategy on further reforms in Uzbekistan, strategy that is meant for 5 years. So, and in this regard, I would like to stress your attention on those key dimensions, those key tasks that are still being implemented in Uzbekistan. But mostly focusing on our bilateral relationship with the United States. And I cannot miss the opportunity to single out a number of them, of all those achievements that we have already gained with the last one year, yes. So in the political dimension, we have intensified our contacts at all levels. Exchange of high-level visits is both intensive and extensive. For this year, almost all of the deputy prime ministers of Uzbekistan have visited the United States, some of them not once. So recent visits by Secretary Ross and Governor Bride, whom I was accompanied a few weeks ago in Uzbekistan, are vivid examples of that new era that we've defined last year during the milestone visit by President Mirziyoyev to the United States. So we have created first ever congressional caucus in Uzbekistan, and moreover the embassy has hosted in early February the first meeting of this friendship group, I would say. And after a long pause, we have registered, as it was mentioned previously, American news outlet, Voice of America. Now we are working on prolonging Navbahor's accreditation in Uzbekistan. So, and Voice of America was followed by EurasiaNet.org, that was also registered within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and American consuls on international education. So yesterday the embassy was hosting so-called educational forum. And actually all leading American universities were well represented, and they attended that gathering at the embassy, and we were deeply honored to have all of them.
I'm worried you have many examples of this, and so I want to make sure that we hear them, but we also...
Sure. So in this regard, taking into account that the time framework is limited today, I would prefer to speak more during Q&A session. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for hosting this, Alice. Great to see you again. Alicia, I'm sorry. And thanks to IREX and the U.S. Agency for Global Media for hosting this important event. And thank you all for coming out. It's great to see such interest in Uzbekistan. And I'm, of course, grateful for the opportunity to discuss not only what's happened in the U.S.-Uzbekistan relationship, but also some of the important changes that are taking place in the country. And as the ambassador mentioned, we formally committed to deepening this bilateral engagement a year ago. I think the visit to the White House by President Mirziyoyev was May 16th, if I'm not mistaken, so almost a year to the day. And it's good that we're taking stock because there's a lot to take stock of. During the visit, President Trump thanked President Mirziyoyev for his leadership in opening up the country. Recent changes in the country have indeed been noteworthy. Uzbekistan has opened its borders, it's forged constructive regional relationships, it's taken steps to improve religious freedom in the country, which allowed us to remove its designation as a country of particular concern in the annual International Religious Freedom Report. Uzbekistan also participated in the July 2018 Ministerial on International Religious Freedom at the State Department, and I think is expecting to participate this year as well. We've also seen an increasingly open economy, the initiation of legal and political reforms that will help improve the lives of Uzbeks. The United States is clear that it will support Uzbekistan with these reform efforts, including the many pledges of cooperation that were made during President Mirziyoyev's visit in the form of MOUs, Memorandums of Understanding, that were signed. For instance, we're seeing the fruits of some of those MOUs in that USAID has recently decided to allocate $19.5 million toward reforms in education. Secretary Ross visited Tashkent to attend an American Uzbekistan Chamber of Commerce business conference last October, where he learned firsthand about the potential for commercial and business engagement. And since that visit, the Uzbek government has undertaken a number of economic and legal reforms to make the economy more competitive and attractive for international business and investment, including signing 3 Geneva Conventions guaranteeing intellectual property rights. Next month, a U.S. certified trade mission will travel to Tashkent, bringing a number of Fortune 500 and other companies to consider trade and other opportunities. And as I mentioned, Uzbekistan is working to improve its relations with its neighbors, resolving old disputes, seeking new areas of cooperation. President Mirziyoyev himself has remarked on the need to increase trade within Central Asia, which is something that's very important. And so this has been a boost, this engagement has been a boost for the entire region. And it's helping to reconnect Central Asia as a crossroads for trade. The United States also deeply appreciates Uzbekistan's efforts to support Afghanistan and to help facilitate peace and stability in this war-torn country. Nowhere was this more evident than during the historic Tashkent conference hosted by the Uzbek government last spring. Also, Uzbekistan's support for power and rail infrastructure in Afghanistan will help improve the lives of Afghans, and it will help create linkages between Afghanistan and the rest of Central and South Asia. The Special Representative for Afghanistan Reconciliation, Ambassador Khalilzad, has visited Uzbekistan twice since his appointment. I actually had the privilege of being part of his delegation during his trip to Uzbekistan in December of last year. So we appreciate this support and what Uzbekistan is doing to facilitate Afghanistan's inclusion in the region and building up the economy, and with all the common, ethnic ties, sharing the border that Uzbekistan has to offer, and that it's doing this and helping Afghanistan. The last area I want to touch on is our cooperation in combating terrorism and violent extremism. Our joint efforts focus on preventing radicalization and helping to build tolerance within Uzbekistan's social institutions. And as families of ISIS fighters are repatriated back into the country, which we just heard about, something that happened this morning, I think these types of programs will become even more important in the future. We have work to do. There are challenges that lie ahead for Uzbekistan. One of them, relaxing restrictions on media and civil society. But we look forward to supporting Uzbekistan in moving forward on these continuing challenges. I'll stop there, and I look forward to taking any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, 5 minutes for an opening remark is too short, I would say. I am delighted to be sitting here alongside with Ambassador Vakhabov, who's a Kurdish, and Dr. Frederick Starr, our old-time Washington colleague on Central Asia. It's great to know that you're willing to sit down with a journalist who usually chases you with questions. So it's nice to be here. It's been exciting to be reporting from Uzbekistan. When I approached the Uzbek government with a request to get accredited early last year, I made it very clear. I was very straightforward. I basically told them I was going to challenge them to see what kind of changes were really taking place in Uzbekistan and whether the regime was willing to let a journalist, Uzbek-American journalist, working for Voice of America, which content the authorities closely watched and monitored and kept blocked for a very, very long time, into the country to find out the truth, I guess, in Uzbekistan. And I got in. So I have been visiting Uzbekistan back and forth as of last summer. It's been great, obviously, and we've been focusing on the big picture. What's really changing and what's not changing in Uzbekistan? How different is the government under President Mirziyoyev? How different is the parliament? What's the human rights situation like in the country? What's changing in terms of the business climate, investment opportunities? And what are Uzbeks saying about what's going on in the country? How do they see the regime, and how do they see the international community? So that's been an incredible experience, and one of my priorities has also been to look at the media landscape. I want to know what's really happening, because obviously media reflects the state of the country, right? So I have been spending a lot of time traveling around the country with journalists, not only interviewing them, but also getting into the newsrooms, finding out how are they changing, new media, private media, state media, what kind of challenges they face, seminars, workshops, roundtables, informal exchanges, master classes. I've been using every hour I have in Uzbekistan to really get the best out of this opportunity. And so the bottom line is that Uzbekistan is struggling. It's the obvious reality there, and there are reforms and there are non-reforms. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of each. There is positive movement, which is obviously reform, and we have to recognize that there is dynamism to a certain level. But then there is also a lot of inertia. Basically, this stasis that I see, the static condition, that's not changing in many ways. And as we sit here, one of the examples for positive changes is that there's a group of journalists in Tashkent at a website called human.uz who are building a new media network which will specifically focus on the human rights issues. So for the first time in Uzbekistan, journalists are basically coming out and saying that we want to be the local source on what's really happening in the country. And they have no assistance, they have no support. These are journalists with good experience with new media, multimedia world, and they want to push forward in their own ways. There is another webpage called minbar.uz, which wants to offer quality content in Uzbek, analytical content, and they're working out of a garage in Tashkent. The website is founded by 4 journalists, but it has only 8 journalists. And so imagine the kind of training and assistance they need. There is a business called Asahi.uz. It's a basically online shopping place, which was founded by a foreign educated Uzbek in partnership with a local entrepreneur, which is now expanding. It will include its media and book business. And when you talk to these people, you see the sound of hope. You see the sound of something called the Uzbek dream. They will tell you that their future is in the country, that they want to build their future in the country. They're struggling with enormous issues. They are learning to support each other, both the ones who have come back from from abroad, from their studies or work, and those inside. So networks are being created, new groups are being created. I have met many activists and journalists around the country who are working individually and in groups to make some kind of a change that they see as possible now. They are able to promote their ideas, they are able to promote their solutions, and they want support, and they don't really see a lot of support coming from the outside, or they don't know how to access that support. So there's a lot of capacity building, confidence building challenges in Uzbekistan that we can totally discuss afterwards. So Uzbekistan had no access to Facebook and YouTube for several months as of last fall. These platforms are open now, which is great, and we finally have been unblocked, which is also great news. But that unblocking job is not complete, and the Uzbek government knows that, because you can't, unblock all of us. Well, let's say not all of us, but several of us, right? The ones that have been blocked for a long time. But leaving out Radio Liberty basically is a show of this very serious intent on behalf of the Uzbek government, which basically means that any of us can be blocked again, because the blocking policy is still in place. So that hurts the media freedom in the country, obviously, and while we are happy that we have been unblocked, we would also like to see other partners, to be open, to be accessible in Uzbekistan. And the non-reform part of things, and I can give you a gazillion of examples. There is a lot of institutional inertia in the country. The failure to meet public expectations. So wherever you go, people feel like, well, yeah, we want to do a lot of things, but somehow we aren't getting there. So you get that. And also the struggle about, yeah, we want to get there, but we don't know how to get there. So the know-how lack. And then obviously corruption persists, entrenched economic interests persist, authoritarian ways of doing things persist. So there is a lot that needs to be obviously, worked. And the openness, obviously it's a relative term, as we all know. There is some opening, and then there is closing somewhere. We can obviously, get into the details of that too. Another big example of a non-reform, I know, yeah, one more thing, is the system is still quite personalized. And you see this everywhere. So it's great to get President Mirziyoyev's attention, but getting his attention is not going to solve the problem, or is not going to deliver or translate into a systemic solution of things. So people know that. So it's good to get President's attention, but they know that it's not going to really get them the solutions they want. But when you talk to the people, they will tell you that unless President wants something or wants to change something, things won't change. So the choice is really now Mirziyoyev's. He either wants to be Uzbekistan's second authoritarian president, who made some changes when he took over, and then eventually, once he consolidated power, he became a typical dictator. Or the second option could be very different. It could be a very different story for Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan could actually turn out to be a really new country, completely changed under Mirziyoyev, with far-reaching institutional changes, open, democratic, prosperous, where Mirziyoyev will be known for an institutional reform. And I think that's where Uzbekistan is now. And when you talk to the people, the second option obviously is what they want. But the realization is that we have to work harder and we have to become more capable to get there. So in many ways, the country is in sort of like a therapy.
On that note. Thank you.
Well, I'm very, very happy to be here at this IREX event. I was in the class before IREX was founded. And maybe later I have one little anecdote on the history of IREX to share with you, but not now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we're talking about is, I would submit, extraordinary development. Risky, yes, but an extraordinarily bold and comprehensive development. What we have had so far are statements of aspiration covering every conceivable field, many that haven't even been mentioned once here. But this is very sweeping, far-reaching, and we haven't barely touched on education, social life, my goodness, transport. It goes into every area of life. And this has all been publicly stated as objectives, not just by the president, but by a whole team of very competent people who are working with him. Now, how are we to understand this? That's the problem. Yes, we can take a minute by minute, react to each new piece of news, good or bad, on a daily basis, but we need to put it in a bigger framework, it seems to me. And frankly, I don't know what that bigger framework is. I've been thrashing around looking at examples from around the world. I thought, well, what about post-World War II Germany and Japan? No, they both lost war, and they were occupied. You can come up with all sorts of possibilities. But I came up with one which I want to recommend to you, and that is Meiji Restoration in Japan. Why? Because Japan was a rich, developed country in its way, but very much totally lacking in a market economy and totally disengaged from developments in the larger world. And suddenly, after Commodore Perry showed up in Nagasaki with black ships in 1853, suddenly they were just ignited with interest. They completely reorganized the government, reestablished highly centralized rule to bring this about, and over the next generation after the 1870s, transformed the country in every way imaginable. All the ways we're talking about: education, technology, social life, even dress. Everything was shaken up, and by the end of the century, they got into a war with Russia over Manchuria. Both countries wanted it, and they soundly beat the Russian Navy the first time an Asian power had defeated a European power. So this was an amazing achievement, but it required a full generation. And that's the point I want to make. Now, beyond that, if you want a quick summary of where things stand on the economic side, read Christine Lagarde's excellent statement issued on May 18th. She's managing director of the IMF and gave a very sober and ultimately very upbeat presentation during her visit there. Now, how do we put this into the contemporary world? I would submit that there has not been in our lifetimes anything comparable to this in scale in terms of aspiration anywhere in the Muslim world, and very rarely in the larger world. And we shouldn't be surprised that habits, many of which date back millennia, aren't transformed overnight. We're talking about culture change. And therefore, it seems to me, given the scale of what's going on, we should be watching this very closely, not minute by minute, but keeping the big picture in mind, And we should be actively, much more actively supporting it than we are. And beyond that, we should understand this has huge regional implications. This is creating, solidifying a region of Central Asia comparable to ASEAN in Southeast Asia. And it is creating a region in which the United States and any forward-looking power will have to have a very keen and abiding interest.
Thank you. Excellent. So I want to remember to pick up my. All right, excellent. Thank you very much. These are great. I think this sets us off on a really great path for a solid conversation. I'm going to ask a couple of questions and then turn it over to the audience as well. So do be thinking about your questions. I think we're collecting them and writing. Somebody said yes, and somebody will have pens and a notepad to jot them down. Picking up on this point about looking at the overall arc and also the point that inertia is a reality when it comes to reforms. I wonder if I could ask the both of you to speak a little bit about the scale of what's been pledged to and the scale of reforms identified really is vast, and I think we just heard a little bit about that. We also really respect that pledging reforms is only the beginning. There's the doing part, and that's the hard part. Maybe could each of you talk a little bit about, as you think about the base of things already laid out in this last year and what's been done already, and looking ahead at the arc, what are the key priorities for the next step, for the next year or the next year or two, and both from the perspective of the government, but also from the perspective of those who are supporting those next steps. So if you could each speak a little to that. I know a lot of people in the room are also interested in what that means for other people who want to be supportive, whether that's journalists or that's nonprofits or that's other actors who might want to support as much as possible. I'm happy for you to go in either order, maybe.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think we are bullish on Uzbekistan's reform process, but admittedly we're at the beginning. We're at the first phase. And I think the first phase is being characterized by a general opening, improving relationships with the region, opening borders, kind of modeling reform in general. So that's very positive. But like you said, the second phase, you have to get in the nitty-gritty. And I think what we see is President Mirziyoyev is welcoming with open arms, international investment in business. But I think there is some learning to be done about what actually attracts international investment in business, and we're starting to see that. We're working very closely with Uzbekistan, and we've seen some of those reforms in terms of the IPR changes that I mentioned. But that will need to characterize kind of the next phase forward, is getting into the nitty-gritty of what's actually required at the technical level to bring in the international investment in business that is definitely being sought after by this government. And then, as I mentioned in my remarks, part of that is the opening up of the civil society and the media, and feeling comfortable opening up all facets of civil society and media. So those would be my two comments: the nitty-gritty on the economic reforms, but then also the sort of civil society media.
So I would like to start saying that Rome was not built in one day, and we are laying our brakes every hour. So in this regard, you are quite right. A lot of things have been done, but more needs to be done. So in this regard, so we are very much straightforward in terms of achieving those very ambitious, but at the same time, I believe very doable goals. And our goals are very clear and simple, and I'm reiterating several times these tasks coming from Tashkent, those commitments related to all Uzbek embassies serving abroad. Again, we're speaking about three key top priorities. Priorities for the current government, both for the current government and the Uzbek embassies. So again, first, as it was mentioned, attracting foreign investments. we know, not so easy to persuade someone to put money in Uzbekistan. But at the same time, as Ms. Curtis mentioned, we have to make a foundation, firm foundation for further investments. And in this regard, I would like to mention that last year, my country has been removed from, I would say, all U.S. government reports that have been released previously by the Department of State, by the Department of Labor, by USTR, etc. So in these terms, we are still improving Uzbekistan's perception according to those reports. And as it was noticed previously, so next month, on July 18th, so we'll be hosting here Foreign Minister of Uzbekistan, who will be attending the Ministerial on Advancing Religious Freedom. And here I would like to note that Uzbekistan is the only country in the watch list, yes, list that we are going to be removed very soon. And in this regard, so my government will be well represented during that ministerial. So beside that, again, as it was mentioned last year, so now we have already provided the new version of the law on religious freedom. The law, the draft of that law that has been passed to Ambassador Brownback personally last week when Grand Mufti of Uzbekistan was arriving in DC. And we're very much hopeful that this law will, after the consideration by OSCE and all respective US agencies, and even Helsinki Commission, will be adopted by the Parliament. So another task that we are carrying out right now is about how we should promote our goods abroad. In these terms, I would like just to draw your attention that in February, the high-level delegation of Uzbekistan, led by the Deputy Prime Minister, the only woman in the government, who attended the Cotton Campaign's annual board meeting. So, and the goal that we were pursuing at that time was to remove my country, remove Uzbekistan from the pledge, from the boycott that has been introduced several years ago. Again, in order to ease the process to reach out to nearest markets where Uzbek textile products could be promoted. So, and last task is about tourism. Again, regarding Americans who visited Uzbekistan last year, we actually doubled the number of American citizens who visited Uzbekistan last year. Moreover, US citizens now are enjoying having direct access to electronic visa. Besides that, the US citizens are also using so-called simplified visa procedure. So moreover, the New York Times included Uzbekistan into 52 must-visit countries, and we're very proud of being on that list. And it means that, again, Uzbekistan is opening up, and these are key three drivers. These are the main goals that we put forward to implement in the near future.
I will say that I am one of those American citizens availing myself of the e-visa because I'm traveling next week, and so can attest to that. Thank you both.
If you fail, just let me know.
Okay, excellent. I'll be sure to do that. No, I want to pick up also on, you used the term an Uzbek dream, an Uzbekistan dream. I mean, you talked about kind of an arc of things and how long it takes to put reforms in place, and you mentioned every day we're laying bricks. I'd like to ask the two of you to address kind of how those things fit together, and I'll frame that for a minute so it's not just a random statement, a series of statements.
there's a link between when people see reforms start, then they have expectations about them. And so I'm wondering if maybe you would talk a little bit about the impact of what people are seeing and what that suggests about what's needed next. And then I wondered if you would talk a little bit about kind of lessons from the area as those things move forward, or lessons that people may have in mind as we think about the effect of how reforms start to take place and what that causes people to look for as they go forward.
So the thing about is that the mood in the country has shifted from that, sheer excitement about having a new leader to what should we really do in this specific field, to move forward. So that's a good conversation to have. And one of the best things, I think, what's happening in Uzbek society is that everything is really being discussed now. At home, at work, on social media, on the streets. There isn't, the level of fear has gone down, I wouldn't say dramatically, but in a very, very relative way. And everything is discussed, the lack of everything pretty much, from freedom to economic opportunities and upward mobility, whatever you see as a problem is out. And people really like the fact that the leader of the country addresses these issues very often. He's traveling region by region. They see an engaged leader, but you have to manage expectations, because every time you're raising these critical issues, people are expecting solutions. So, how do you integrate people into the solution, problem-solving process, and how do you compel them to feel the weight of it too, right? Because you want the citizenry to work with you. So that's a huge challenge, I think, and that's something that I see the administration struggling with. The question is, do we create this space first for change, or do we push for change and create this space as a byproduct, So it's like a chicken and egg problem, really. And people will give you a list of problems, and then the question for me, very easy question, is, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, they're going and complaining to the government. They have a way to do that now. But that system has created such an enormous backlog. It's another bureaucratic hurdle now for the government to handle, and they're not doing a very good job there. So I think managing public's expectations is a huge challenge. And when you talk to the officials at every level, and they prefer, the good news is that a lot of them can go on the record now. I mean, I can't have enough time in Uzbekistan to interview people, honestly. And they have a lot of questions for me, too, and I have tons of questions for them. And they want to be heard. They want you to listen to their side of the story. And what I hear very often from the Uzbek officials is that, well, we wish there was a manual for, how to make change. And my answer is that, well, there's a lot of material out there on that. But guess what? None of them are really available in Uzbek, and none of them are really generated in Uzbekistan. So that's something else that you have to work on. So that conversation is there, but I think that dialogue should start delivering some solutions. And I think the best way to go for the Uzbek government would be to involve the people, to work with those people in various, especially in remote areas of Uzbekistan, who try to make that change. There are many activists. They don't have to necessarily be the well-known human rights activists. You have community leaders now that you have to reach out and show support. And if the Uzbek government can't do that, then they should let the assistance groups to do that job for them. So I think it's really how to strategize and how to use the space, whatever is now, to really enlarge it to a bigger scale. But the discussions are good, but people expect more from the discussions, obviously.
I'm sitting here wondering how to respond to this tough question, and here's how I'm trying to. Think of it as a medical problem. Here you have a patient, we're all patients at some point after all, goes in for a checkup, and the doctor says, well, you have, and it comes off with a long string of things that need attention, down to a problem with the left thumb fingernail, or, who knows, everything you can imagine. Well, a serious medical person will prioritize and strategize. They'll say, you have to do this first, and then you do that, and then you do this. And that's what this requires. So let me attempt, forgive my immodesty in doing so, let me attempt 3 three things that need attention during this next year. First, it would seem to me, yes, investment has been mentioned by Ambassador Vakhabov, and rightly so. The state still controls 85% of the assets of the country. That's way, way, way high. But it's not just investments, it's the quality of investments. This is as important as the quantity. And that means getting modern firms and investing in modern firms. This is exceedingly important. And it's not just the quantity. The second issue, I would say, is, in referring to what you touched upon, is local administration. The president announced that he gave a website, anyone can complain or make suggestions. 2 million suggestions came in. The president's office had to hire 100 people to process these. I mean, imagine, this is madness. But what you really need to do in the first early phase is improve the responsiveness of local administrations. This is, I would say, number 2. If you do that, you're engaging people in constructive ways. Third, it seems to me, is this is not Uzbek alone. This is not just Uzbekistan, it's regional. What's going on in Uzbekistan will have a big regional impact. It already has. The growth of trade, the growth of transport, of movement of people. People want to be able to invest simultaneously in all these countries, 5 or 6 countries, including Afghanistan. U.S. government does not yet include Afghanistan as part of Central Asia, although the Central Asians themselves do. But taking a more regional approach, it seems to me that if the government of Uzbekistan takes an active role in regionalizing this discussion in the next year, it will be a signal to everyone that will become mutually reinforcing. And by the way, U.S. policy should also treat it as a region and not as 6 separate countries.
I think that's a soft take. I think we're set then to take a lot of good questions from the audience, and we've got about a half hour to do so. So thank you for that, I appreciate it. I've got them here and in writing. All right, let's see. I'm afraid people with optimal handwriting are going to win. About which questions we're going to answer. Okay, so the question is, how do you create the space and drivers for citizens to identify and create their own change with or without the government? And I think that picks up a little bit on something each of you spoke about in terms of volume and then the way support and the government work together. So I guess the question, how do you create space and drivers for citizens, which we've talked about a little bit, and it sounds like there are some things that were underway already. I will add to that because it was reflected on one of the other cards. What is the role of other actors in that, whether those are capacity building organizations or those are existing organizations in country, journalists and others? So maybe if I could ask you, Mr. Ambassador, to lead us off, how are you thinking about the way Uzbekistan creates the space and drivers for citizens to to participate in change, and what maybe is the role of organizations in working with them on that?
So I would like to draw your attention how the current cabinet is still changing. Again, it's not a secret. There are a lot of opportunities to take part in ongoing reforms, and all those doors for our youth are open right now. So if my mind doesn't change me, 7 or 8 members of the current cabinet are Western educated people. So moreover, one of the members of the current government is a U.S. citizen who is in Uzbekology. By the way, the gentleman will be arriving very soon in D.C. So at the same time, the government strongly believes in human capital. So the main task, the main goal that we are pursuing right now is to increase the capability of all public servants in Uzbekistan, and to prepare our youth for their future jobs. In this regard, so it was mentioned yesterday, as I mentioned when I was hosting the educational forum at the embassy. So we actually want to foster the Uzbek youngsters who are thirsty for knowledge right now in that way that will meet to our current requirements. So you see, annually, almost 700,000 young Uzbekistanis are entering the local labor market. And the main tough issue for the government is, of course, is to create jobs for them. So there are a lot of, there's a huge demand coming from that strata. And by the way, almost 37% of our population, almost 12 million people, are the youth, are the youngsters under the age of 19. So in this regard, so we are welcoming all educational institutions, especially those coming from abroad. Today, Uzbekistan is the only country in the region that hosts 17 branches of leading foreign universities. And among them is the Missouri-based Washington universities that has already entered the educational market of Uzbekistan and will start educating our youth this coming fall. So in these terms, the government allocates a lot of fundings to education system of Uzbekistan. Almost 10-12% of the GDP are being allocated specifically to education system. And annually, national budget provides more than 35% of all revenues, national revenues, mainly to education system. So again, the goal is to increase the level of knowledge, to increase the level of capacity of those people who will run the country in near future. So in this regard, I should also note that the current government is becoming younger and younger. So the average age of all members of the current government is about 35-40 years old right now. So I believe the number of those young people will be expanded in the future.
Thank you. And maybe some of the questions that are reflected in some of these others, maybe a way to pick up on that. There is actually one about youth, so I won't circle back right away on that one. But to ask a little bit about, Lisa, maybe you could speak to how from the outside people support that and this ability for people to be part of change, whether that is aligning youth with the employment market or that is citizens participating in other things. What's the role of what's the support side of this look like?
Well, we're looking at how we can increase our assistance programs, our USAID programming to Uzbekistan to be able to support that demand for the technical assistance, for English language education. I mentioned the 19.5 million allocation that's recently been made for reforms in the public education sector. So, we really stand ready to take advantage of these openings that we see and this demand that's coming from the Uzbek government. So we're looking at, how we can increase our programming, not only in education, but also health, governance, reform, all of these issues, as well as in the economic sector. And one of the things we're doing is helping with energy sector reforms so that we improve Uzbekistan's ability to monetize its vast energy, gas reserves in particular. So, you know, there's a lot that the U.S. government can do through our technical assistance programs, and we're sort of in the process right now of looking at, you know, how we meet the various demands and how we can, you know, ensure that we take advantage of this window. You know, hopefully this is going to be a window that's open for a long time, but it would be a shame if we didn't sort of step forward and support Uzbekistan in, you know, any way that we can to provide the technical assistance, the know-how that you're talking about, to actually move the reform forward.
Thank you.
I've got 3 cards here that ask about regional issues and 2 that mention China. So I'm going to lump them up together and ask a broader region, region and other geographies question. In particular, picking up on the points that you've made about the kind of regional nature of the impact that some of this reform can have if it's regionalized. One person's asking, do you foresee the development of a Central Asian association? That if you're talking about the scale that was at before. A couple of others have asked about the way Uzbekistan is thinking about the role of reaching populations in other countries in the process of engaging these reforms. And then a third is talking about water being one of the central issues for the region as a whole and Uzbekistan's role in that. So I will roll those together by asking you, maybe Dr. Starr, to talk a little bit about kind of the regional side of this, and if you can touch on those, that's great.
It's extremely important to mention, and far more important than our strategy to date has acknowledged. And I say that with due respect for the many, many very, very talented and committed former diplomats in the room who actively engaged with these issues over many years and decades, and are good friends. Now, why? What's going on? Well, there is already a nascent association, and it's going to develop. It's bound to develop. The presidents have met. They have a second gathering. There will surely be follow-up, and now talking about what kind of institutional structure. And there's been a delegation of younger men and women from the regional countries that went to Singapore and spent 10 days there just this spring, examining ASEAN very closely. Similar effort is being made with regard to the Nordic Council in Scandinavia, which is a very important, not highly visible entity. So they're studying all the various models to take the best from all of them, and this will develop at an organic pace. It's not going to gallop. It'll work at the level that fits all the 6 countries that we're talking about. In terms of water, Uzbekistan organized a major UN water conference in which all the countries of the region participated. So this is already happening. By the way, Afghanistan, which is both an upstream and downstream country, the only one, it's time to engage them fully in the water issue, and that's yet one more reason to think about this in regional terms. If I just make a quick point on the earlier issue of civil society. Western policy, our book on Uzbekistan's new face goes into this. Western policy focused very much on civil society for 25 years. Basically not ignoring the state, but basically not working with them. And that has to change, because the problem, either you work with them or you work on them. We have been working on them, not with them. And all the problems that civil society and citizens face have to do with the culture of local administrators, local bureaucrats, and higher level bureaucrats. So it seems to me it's time for us to refocus. If you want to really do something for citizenship and civil society, focus on the institutions in the country with which they most closely interact and with which they've had the greatest problems over the years.
I do want to come back to the question of youth, but I actually want to ask you to talk a little bit about it, if you will. You mentioned some demographics and the volume of youth entering the workforce and Youth is close to our heart at IREX too. This is part of one of the things that we focus on quite a lot, and in particular questions around entering the workforce sometimes. So because you've recently been talking to so many people, I wondered maybe the question was about the government's plans for addressing that, but you laid that out quite a lot. I think it'd be interesting to hear how people are reflecting on the path they see youth able to take into the future. And specifically somebody asked whether kind of the education system, the tertiary education system, is gearing them for the jobs that they would need to have, and how much that's reflected in the way people talk about thinking about their future.
Well, I mean, it's educational reforms and the current state of the education system in the country are discussed very widely. And youth will, they don't hide their views. And their views, not at all. The statistics are now telling us that half of the country is under the age of 30. So this is a very young country. And so whatever is changing in Uzbekistan is changing because of those young people, I would argue. And they are, while they are very supportive of President Mirziyoyev, which I think is a huge political capital for him that he should use and get things done, I think it's, if the biggest failure for the Uzbek government would be if they don't meet the expectations and the demands of these young people, to an extent. That would be the biggest failure, I think. Because this is the driving forces. They're not happy with the current level of education, the quality of education, if you ask them, not happy at all. Higher education is very unaffordable. It's very difficult to get into the Uzbek universities. They still operate under the quota system. They're reforming it now, but there aren't enough universities, higher education institutions to accommodate the demand. Going abroad is still difficult because of the economic conditions at home, and also, the requirements are very high. So, lack of opportunities, lack of employment, lack of educational opportunities are the ones that you hear from them a lot. But at the same time, they're not very pessimistic. They can be cynical, but they're not pessimistic about the future. That's one of the nice, things. They're not hopeless. So they will be complaining, but they'll also be figuring out, of doing things. I mean, the bloggers, the most, I guess, I wouldn't say powerful, but they have their own influence in the Uzbek society. Now, it's sort of like a misnamed term, honestly, for them. They're social critics. They criticize, they bring out the issues. Uzbekistan now lives from one controversy to another. Every day there is some kind of a controversy, and the young people are driving those controversies. Telegram is a very popular social platform in Uzbekistan, so you have hundreds of channels where young people are really changing these views. And the most critical views about the government, about everything else, about the establishment in the country, it comes from them. So invest in them, obviously. Make sure that educational reforms, social reforms accelerate, because that's how they are. So whatever you do in Uzbekistan, obviously, are going to influence the lives of those young people. But many young people, once they graduate, they don't either have enough skills to do things, so diploma doesn't really make you a capable person. That's the reality in Uzbekistan. When I talk to various companies, especially in the private sector, they tell me it's not like, we have, we can't measure the size of the human capital based on the population of Uzbekistan. We can't say that we have this much human capital, because do we have the capable people? Do we have the people who can do things? And you hear the same thing from the government. They're like, well, we have many vacancies, but we don't have capable people. We don't have enough people who write well in Uzbek. Forget about writing, in English or in Russian. So lots of fundamental issues. And things are quite different when you leave Tashkent, obviously, when you go to the regions. I've met a lot of young people who are in small business, which is great. A very entrepreneurial, energy and mood. So all of them need some kind of an encouragement and assistance, but they're not necessarily waiting for the government to come and ease their lives. They want the banking sector become more easy to work with. They want the government services become better. I mean, they want the basic services to improve in the country, and the rest they'll take care of it.
Thank you. I'm realizing we've got about 8 or 10 minutes left. And so I want to ask a question that kind of everyone can address, and I actually will read one directly from writing. I can read this handwriting. And then we'll encourage folks, we do have the room, I think, for a little bit afterwards if you'd like to stand around and talk for a bit. I know that I did not get a chance to read all of the questions, and I also realized I mixed some of them up together, so please stay and spend a little time. So the question that I've got that I think is a good space for everyone to reflect on and give any kind of final comments that you'd like to give. So both from the governments and outside perspectives, what sort of reception does research and critique about Uzbekistan get from others, and what is its potential role in capacity building? And I'll say I chose this one in part because I heard everyone talk a little bit about challenges, identifying what are continued problems, what are ways that people are planning to address the problem, and I will share the recognition that whenever you commit to make a change, everyone has opinions about how you should do it and what's the most important thing to do first. So I think this is a valid question, and a point, how valuable is that hire? How is it interpreted when that's raised elsewhere? So both from the government and outside perspectives, what sort of reception does research and critique about Uzbekistan's reform get from the government, and what is that potential in capacity building?
I agree with that. Well, I mean, talk about the lack of things in Uzbekistan. Lack of data is a huge problem. So I don't think we have enough data and research and critique out there to really, to have enough impact on the way things are done in Uzbekistan. And so that's one big problem. When I refer to this, jokingly saying that there's a lot of material there, on how to make change, I really meant it because the craft of journalism, for example, matters more than ever in the country, right? State media remains untouched. It's as authoritarian, as unreformed as ever. They are still telling the stories of the state rather than the people's real issues. So that is a huge, I think, barrier. Because it's a monopoly, so Uzbek National Broadcasting Company essentially owns dozens and dozens of channels around the country, and they're not really helping in the reform process because they are stagnated and nobody has really done anything major to change that. So that's one big thing. So talk about the lack of critical thinking. So media aren't there to help people think critically, right? And also the quality content is now slowly becoming available in the Uzbek language. That's been one of the main challenges too, because for a long time Uzbeks, if they wanted quality content, they have to seek it in a foreign language, either in Russian or in English. Now, one of the biggest changes is that you have a vibrant Uzbek language media, online media, and that's good, and they need support. And some of them are private, and some of them are semi. There's really nothing private when it comes to media in Uzbekistan. Let's just say that out loud. But there is a lot of movement there, positive movement. So that needs help. But I would say, reform state media. That's a huge, major step for the government to do, and also listen to the citizens. You don't have to listen to each and everyone moaning and complaining about little, issues, but look at the bigger picture, but also focus region by region about what really needs to be done. And I think the central strategy isn't there yet. That's one of the biggest problems in Uzbekistan. You have, who's the reform team? It's very hard to answer that question. The biggest reformer, the only reformer, is seen as President Mirziyoyev. So you need the faces of this reform. You need people who are out there owning the issues and owning the reform agenda and explaining it to the people. The government obviously needs to work very, very hard on its public relations, press services. Now that's slowly being discussed, and then this newly named agency on information and mass communication is promising to do a lot of things, so people are watching. But one agency cannot change Uzbekistan, so you need to know the people behind these changes, or whoever is owning this reform, other than President Mirziyoyev. And I think those are the things that are really going to have an impact on the minds of people and inspire them to do more than what they're able to do now. Otherwise, it'll just be the same, changing things there and here and claiming reforms.
I would just note, I think we need more exchanges just like we're having today. I applaud the Uzbek government for sending so many visitors over here to the U.S. I admit the U.S. government could probably do a better job sending more visitors to Central Asia in general, Uzbekistan in particular. So I think that exchanges are important, and just to echo, the data, the research, it's not really there. We need more research, more academic exchanges going both ways. We need more research from the U.S., more visitors going to Uzbekistan, and having that interaction and dialogue, I think, is the best way to facilitate forward movement. And I would even pull the lens back and talk about the region in general. And we talked about how there is a greater sense of region, and I think this is so important because that helps the individual countries have more independence to be more resilient, protect their own sovereignty. I think the stronger the region is and the stronger the cooperation amongst the region, the stronger the states will be individually. And so the U.S. is focusing both on developing strong bilateral relationships with each of the individual Central Asian nations, but equally, we put on an equal level, is encouraging that regional interaction, and that's why we have our C5+1 as our sort of premier way of engaging with the region to encourage the intra-regional cooperation.
For the longest time, we had this sort of a very vague explanation from the Uzbek government that the border situation is the best that we can have, right now. So they said that for years and years and years. And I just visited 4 border posts, basically the biggest crossing points with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan. And I was honestly amazed at the level of change there. I think one of the biggest changes have actually happened there. They work consistently, open 24/7, clean, no messy lines. Security officers and customs officers seem better trained, and I didn't warn them, I just showed up. And I got the permits, to shoot there, and we're going to obviously have those available very soon, the reports. But I was amazed how happy people are crossing, entering Uzbekistan in and out. Fast, go back 3-4 years, messy lines, people screaming at each other, abuse, corruption. People still complain of some things, like the amount of, or the kinds of things that they can bring into the country or not. But in general, everybody I talked to, and I talked to the dozens of people, we have big meetings there, interesting exchanges. People are happy, they see change there. They treat them properly. They were telling me that now we're treated as citizens. I like crossing the borders. And a lot of those people I talked to were young people, small traders, especially between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. I always imagined that the Uzbek borders would be these heavily armed, unapproachable places. And they were, I saw change there on the borders. So whatever they're doing with the neighboring countries, I think, is working so far.
You asked, or someone asked, about the response to Western or outside research and comments and suggestions. Our experience at the Central Asia Caucasus Institute for 25 years has been quite positive. The question is, what's the basis of knowledge on which these ideas and proposals are put forward? And frankly, that's been a problem. The entire political science industry in the United States spent 20 years writing about political clans in Central Asia, and this is now deader than a doornail. It never was real. But for factors having to do purely with the vagaries of American academia, some very bright young men and women devoted first decade of their career to something that didn't exist. So the question is the knowledge base that we have. And let me give as an example, since education has come up time and time again, and rightly so. We tend to talk about universities, and your embassy does, but Uzbekistan founded in the last 20 years some 400 vocational technical schools. I've visited a half dozen of these in different cities. Some of them are kind of silly, others are very impressive. And interestingly, the Swiss and the Germans have who have a serious vocational technical capacity have discovered these and are eager to work with them. We haven't. They haven't entered our field of vision. So I think the answer to your question depends on the level of our knowledge and the sophistication of our knowledge with which we approach them. And I think if you have a good basis, you'll get a good hearing. Now, one final point on being the regional point. It's so very important what you've said. And the United States government has indeed embraced this concept. I think there's a lot of distance, though, between the cup and the lip. And I would hope that we go further than we have, and not just the C5 plus 1 is good, it should be C6, but we should way beyond that become a regional convener on all sorts of topics. And we don't need to be in the room. We can set up a meeting, wish everyone well, and leave the room. Being a regional convener is very important. Why? Because this is the key to their survival in a very complex geopolitical world with China, which was mentioned but not followed up, and Russia breathing down their neck, trying to open the door to the south, to India and so on, Southeast Asia. In such a world, it's very easy for outside powers to play the old divide and conquer game. We should be on the other side of that issue. Not divide and conquer, but a convener, not telling them what they should be doing, but we simply use our capacities to convene, and that will be a very positive step.
Mr. Ambassador, I'll make sure the name of the country is in the title of the event. We should give you the last word. In fact, I'll even hand you the microphone if you'd like to hold it.
So just a few points regarding the regional dimension and water management resources issues. So just wanted to add to the point regarding the summit that took place last year in Astana, first ever gathering that was attended by all Central Asian leaders. And by the way, the initiative to hold annually such kind of summits belongs to the President of Uzbekistan. And this year, the second summit was supposed to be held in Tashkent, but due to some changes taken in neighboring country, it was postponed. But we're still working on that, and this summit will definitely take place in Tashkent very soon. So regarding C6, Fred hasn't mentioned which country he meant. But I would like to add, he wanted to say about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a country that we, all actually Central Asian countries, started perceiving as an integral part of Central Asia. We started looking at Afghanistan as a source of headache, as a source of threats to the region of Central Asia. So in this regard, we are very much hopeful that Afghanistan will be a part of current changes in the region. Moreover, this year, TIFA, Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, will have its annual session here in DC, and we, all Central Asian leaders, are very much supportive of seeing Afghanistan as an integral part of this format. And who knows, perhaps in the near future, C5 will be also added by Afghanistan. Again, it wasn't mentioned today that next month Under Secretary Hale will be visiting the region, so he'll be traveling to both Nur Sultan and Tashkent. So in Nur Sultan, C5 plus 1 summit is expected to be held, and later the Undersecretary will be moving to Tashkent, where we are going to arrange several meetings, and he will be received by the President as well. So regarding water resources management issues, so at this moment we have already solved those challenging issues. But again, those solutions are based on so-called gentlemen's agreements. But it's, at the same time, we proceed from the firm understanding that the region of Central Asia, should have international conventions that will oversee the use of resources of all those famous rivers, Modera and Sirdaria. And just a few years ago, the United Nations Regional Preventive Diplomacy Center put forward the initiative to conclude 2 agreements, and those agreements actually were supported by the region, and I think it's the right time to revive our discussions over that.
Thank you very much to our panel. Thank you all for the contributions. Thank you all for the questions and for participating today.